My name is Greg Bentham. I am a sustainable technology head with Capgemini.
Thanks, Greg. I'm Mike Bennett, and I'm the Senior Director with our Transformation and Sustainability Services, located in Atlanta. So nice to be here. Thanks for taking the time to come.
So to get things started, ESG from a corporate perspective is taking a much more prominent role. What we're seeing is the prioritization of the ESG agenda moving up consistently on the corporate agenda. And this is driven primarily by major demands coming from the stakeholders of our corporations to the C-suite. Whether we're talking about customers, prospective employees, current employees for that matter, whether we're talking about the analyst community around investments, or the most exciting part of it, and I'm being a little facetious, the regulators. Nonetheless, there is major demand that we're seeing for our corporations to do more, to make adjustments, to pivot. And so in terms of us as a sustainable technology provider, how do we try to create value? That's the major question that we're bringing to the table. What do we do in this situation? And really, it's not that simple of an answer, because most of the time when I go to meet with a client for the first time, the first question that usually comes out is, well, how am I going to pay for this? Or what is the business case around this ESG thing anyway? And so what I'm inviting each of you to consider today is a paradigm shift to maybe help our corporate stakeholders, the C-suite, our clients, to make a change, make an adjustment how we're looking at the ESG agenda. Mike?
Thanks. And one of the things that we also consider is it's an and. It's not just compliance. You can be profitable, and corporations can be profitable while approaching sustainability. And when you think about that, and you're going to hear more today, but some of the things that are impacting the businesses in IT in general, funding and compliance, performance management. So, to give you some hints at some research recently, by 2027, it's said that there'll be a 25% ESG performance comp metric for CIOs. So it's going to become an imperative. Not just the fact that there's tools and processes in place, but how are we doing to support the organization, right? And the funding for this is astronomical. And again, another McKinsey stated that, by 2030, it's going to be a $1.2 trillion market. Massive. And to get there, it's going to take $6 to $16 trillion of funding, whether it's governments, compliance, service providers, companies, to meet the needs and the agenda. So the funding is absolutely astronomical in this. So again, it can be a profitable, saving the planet can be profitable. So what you're going to hear is two different perspectives today. I'm going to cover it from an operations side. So the Office of the CFO, the Office of the Chief Sustainability Officer, and Greg's going to take it from the Office of the CIO, or the Chief Data Officer, Digital Officer. Greg?
Yeah. So let's get started. So when we look at the ESG perspective, first we have to step back and look at the corporation and some of the functions that we see in corporations, and how those functions over the last couple of decades have substantially sprawled out or increased. What this is driving is a material level of complexity. Complexity that we need an ESG function at the center to help simplify. And so when we look at these individual areas or functions, they themselves are responsible for creating their own set of criteria that need to be measured. They're responsible for creating the scope 1, 2, 3 emissions that relate to their corporate functions. They all are measured, their KPIs are all driven and measured in a different way. What we're suggesting is the ESG function bring this together, and what we lean to is a transformation of sorts of the business model. The transformation that we're driving is about how do we get access in a very quick way to turning the organization around and making sure that the organization is first ready to accept that transformation change. And I'm talking about from an organizational change management perspective. Mike, what are you seeing in these areas around transformation?
Sure. So when you think about the complexities, it impacts every process in the organization. As you see in the graphic here, it has the business areas, but data is the challenge, but data is also the key. Because if you can collect and have access to all the data, external data, your suppliers, your customers, your internal data, in a place where it can be reported on, then that's how you can get the most efficient approach to the ESG compliance reporting. And some of the key aspects, you have to collect the data, you got to measure it, you got to report on it. Some people stop there, but no, then you have to act on it, because your choices that you may make for procurement may depend on the score of your compliance of some of the vendors, and the customers will evaluate the same way. So it's taking all those. So I'm going to take a few areas if we look at it. So IT, you've heard conversation here yesterday on this stage, e-waste, right? Or energy consumption of compute power is going to have to be measured and collected. Procurement, like I said, if you reach out, if you're a manufacturing company or a CPG company, you're sourcing, extending out to your suppliers, what are their sustainability performance scores? What are they doing? How are they doing? And what are the programs they have in place? When you look at supply chain, think logistics, trucks, cars, rail, boats. All those things consume and use energy. So it's an extension of your score, your sustainability. And then lastly, if you think of R&D, and I would say my age, my generation, but my kids, right? 30, 40 years old, next generation, new product introduction is actually going to be designed. Products will be designed with sustainability in mind, not just a reactive aspect, but a proactive aspect for products coming to market. They'll be thought of with sustainability. Greg?
So thanks, Mike, for those points. So I guess the next thing that I want to be able to do with you is decompose the problem a little, because all of those lines, that complexity is extremely confusing overall. And so a key part of what we believe is at the center of solving the issue is getting a rapid grasp on the data. When we turn around and we look at the engagements and the customers that I regularly speak with, and many of our success stories, they're driven first and foremost from a customer that first decides to go and understand what is their data strategy. Because once they have a comprehensive understanding around the data strategy, then all of the points of measure come into place in a very successful way. I'd like to invite you and introduce you to a function which we call data orchestration. And the beauty of being at ServiceNow is they happen to do it quite well. So when I think about data orchestration, there's a couple of things that go into it. Number one is about the workflow. So when we think about workflow, it's how do we, and I'll even be more pointed, automated workflow. How do we go to get the data set, whatever that data set is, however amount of times, the frequency in which we go get that data set, that needs to be instrumented and laid out, so workflow. The second thing then that I'll talk about is the security of the data we're getting. Understand that ultimately what we are looking to do and have to do is report on this. So the data source has to be trustworthy. And we understand that there's several data sources that we will have to take in. Some will be through API connection. Some we will receive through emails. Some we have to receive to start by word of mouth. The bottom line is whatever the data is that we're collecting, we have to do it in a way that's secure so that we ultimately turn around and are able to sustain an audit. Finally, we have to move the data. And we have to move that data to some location that's adequate enough, secure enough, to leave it there and put it in position to be processed. So Mike, what do you see next overall?
Sure. So we've developed the Sustainability Hub, and again, comes back to the data all in one place, the platform there, so that it can be reported on. Risk management and risk compliance can be evaluated against it, and we can evaluate our suppliers as we're being evaluated by our customers or the street. Performance management. So you've probably heard in some sessions today in the keynote, the number of metrics, the number of things that you can measure. If you think of every operational process in there, the number of metrics, it's silly, it's huge. So what do you measure? What are the right things? But at least the hub gives you a starting point. These performance metrics get you there, and then planning and forecasting. How do I project? How do I use that for my annual reports to convey, here's my sustainability approach for X, Y, and Z years to come. A couple case studies that I just want to run through for you. So there was a large global bank, financial institution, and we put together the platform for their sustainability so that they could measure the emissions that they finance. So the organizations or companies that they obviously have relationships with, but they could measure the sustainability scores and metrics for their portfolio of accounts. And then we're able to get 100% compliance to the Paris Agreement for financing, which pretty amazing. A digital products company, I'm not going to name names, or I'm going to try not to, but they were asking us to put together the platform to help them with their supply chain, right? How do we measure it? How do we get this data? They have growth through acquisition, so they have multiple ERPs. They have multiple data sets. They have non-harmonized data. All this stuff to build into the Sustainability Hub so that they can enable their own reporting, and they're on that path, which is pretty good. And then finally, automotive. So global automotive manufacturer with the sustainability platform and the hub has achieved 25% reduction in their carbon footprint of their vehicles that they put on the road. And their goal is to get to 40% reduction in carbon footprint for all their vehicles for the vehicle lifetime by 2025, I believe it is. So very aggressive goals, but they're actually making a difference. So those kind of use cases to me tell me that it can be done, and to me it should be done. I'm absolutely a sustainability evangelist. So those are the things that I think really make the most sense, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And so there's one area that I want to, before we move on, is specific to technology, right? When we apply this, how we're applying this to technology today for Capgemini, think about at an infrastructure level, whether it's your router, your switch, your server, your storage frame, they're all powered by electricity. And we all manage those through a systems management platform of sorts today. And we house those assets in a CMDB, most likely ServiceNow today. So how we're bringing the sustainability story to life from a technology perspective is we have increased the attributes and information that we're pulling back from the systems management platform. So we're able to directly interrogate systems for precisely what level of electricity they're consuming. Now understand that this use case, we're not able to do that for every system. So there is some extrapolation that is also needed to bring the full story together. But a core portion of how Capgemini delivers infrastructure services today is a mechanism we call through embedded sustainability, which is the monitoring of the electricity consumption of the systems we manage and operate. Let's move on. Mike, the use cases were good. I think it's worthwhile at this point to maybe do a quick recap so that we give ourselves some time for questions. So, number one, if I turn around and I look at the first piece, what we talked about today is that there is a way, if we look through the sustainability lens, there is a way to still gauge proper corporate performance, right? If we configure, manage, deploy IT as an example in a green way, more than likely it will translate into a lower cost deployment, right? So this is about looking at how we're driving performance of the corporation through a sustainability lens. We can drive the same cost improvements, which result in margin improvement. We can drive the same balance around how we deliver customer satisfaction and brand reputation. And finally, we can grow our revenue because of that brand reputation. It's just looking at it through a green lens. So that's the first point. The second point is when we look at data, how we bring it together. Data is integral. What we don't measure, we can't improve on. Data is integral, and a data plan is integral to how we garner success. And then finally, if we look at how we start something like this, typically the approach is to do some sort of baselining assessment. And this piece is very important. The assessment is not just about an empirical set of data pulling of views. That's important. But also equally as important is a qualitative assessment. What is the organization's readiness to accept this change? Because that goes just as important with understanding what you're changing.